This is not a conversation that can be rushed, so I'm going to take my time. In this video, I am going to tell you how I recovered my sexual sovereignty, my sexual joy, my sexual pleasure as a survivor of incest, child abuse, and a rape survivor. And I think it's a really important journey that a lot of us are on. And I want to just say right now that not everybody has been sexually assaulted as a child, and not everybody has been raped. Far too many women have. 1 in 4 girls will be sexually assaulted before she hits age 18. And a lot of women have been raped. But what we found out from #MeToo was almost all women have had some kind of sexual harassment encounters with men that felt at least borderline non-consensual, degrading. In my practice as a relationship coach and sexologist, I have sure encountered a lot of wives and girlfriends who are enduring sex that they don't enjoy in order to please their husband or boyfriend. So I think it's safe to say that this video is for all women, but especially for survivors. So I want to start at the beginning. For me, I was not fooled by my father's predations. I didn't get drawn into it and think, oh, I'm special. Some girls do. Some boys do. They feel like the person who's perpetrating against them when they're really, really young keeps telling them how special they are and how loved they are, and you can really get roped into that. I did not, and in a lot of ways, that was fortunate for me. It meant that my father scapegoated me and routinely verbally abused me, but he touched me less. And I was able to keep some sense of myself because of that. So I feel really lucky that I wasn't special to Daddy, even if he had a really hard time keeping his hands to himself. I was, however, poisoned with the idea that my sole purpose in life was to sexually titillate and please men. What he often said was that he told me at such a young age I should not have even had breasts, but he kept saying that I was skinny and flat-chested, and no man would ever want me, particularly because I had a bad attitude. So I left home and proved Daddy wrong by becoming a sex worker and finding out, whoa, lots of men really do like me. That was actually an empowering thing for me, but it was only empowering for me because I was 4 years clean and sober, 4 years in intense therapy as an incest survivor, and 7 years in corporate America working a lot of desk jobs, office manager, department manager. I had choices. I didn't go into the sex industry because I had a lack of choices. I had a college diploma. I'd graduated from honors from Oregon State University. So I had a lot of options, and I chose the sex industry because I wanted to make some money fast, and it sounded exciting. And it turns out both were true. What I did not expect was that I was going to experience some sexual empowerment. There was an unexpected twist to this story. I did not realize that men were going to actually put me in a position of power that they never did when I was sitting behind that desk typing. The same types of men, high-powered businessmen who just used to routinely tell me to go fetch a cup of coffee for them. Keep in mind this was the 80s. And never even bothered to learn my name and just expect me to make phone calls for them and just drop whatever I was doing and be at their beck and call. Those same types of men were my clients now as an escort, and they were respectful, and I was shocked. But not only that, they wanted to turn the keys over to me, if you will. It was like they paid me, and then they just wanted me to be in charge. And they would say, well, you tell me what we're going to do. And I'm like, oh boy, I think I need to take some classes in sex. So I did. I took classes in Tantra. I learned how to move energy. I learned how to work with breath and with bodies. And I also studied a lot of other things around sex. The most powerful thing that I learned in my early days as an escort came from my mentor, Cozy Fabian. Cozy Fabian has passed on, but in her day, she taught classes in sacred prostitution. And what's really amazing about the concept of sacred prostitution is it really takes it out of the idea that sex workers are here to please men. It's so much more about kind of a spiritual devotion to sex as a sacred calling and being in a leadership role. So I had very, very good boundaries with my clients. I always put myself first, and by that I mean my safety, my health, and my comfort. And I did not allow the men that were paying for my time to in any way, shape, or form abuse or demean me. Now that stands in stark contrast to what I would allow a boyfriend or a husband to do. So I was having difficulty with my husband while I was working as a sex worker. He was not respectful. He wanted to dominate me, and that was a problem. I felt empowered enough about having my own source of income that that's not the direction that I allowed our marriage to go in. In fact, I went too far the other way of being pretty bossy and controlling. And that's another rabbit hole I will go down another time. But for now, let's just say that there was something very powerful about having my own source of income and not submitting to my husband, which, of course, I had been taught in the religious cult that my parents raised me in. So that was not to be for me. I learned something from Cozy Fabian about the female genitalia that stuck with me forever, and it is still a really precious part of my psyche today. I grew up feeling kind of ashamed of my female body. I knew it was powerful. I knew I could sometimes get attention and favors through my body, and I didn't have to do anything for it. It just looked cute and flirt. But I also felt like there was something really demeaned about the way we have sex and the way we even urinate, that somehow or another men were superior to us and standing over us and feeling proud of their genitalia and proud of the way they urinate. And I guess I got that message pretty early when I was about 8 years old, and a cousin of mine drew a picture of himself peeing standing up. And I thought I would never draw a picture of myself peeing because I'd be squatting. And it just felt somehow or another humiliating. Well, what I learned from Cozy Fabian was something called the ISIS squat. And I'd never heard of such a thing. But the way she taught it was that we would actually stand on our feet, even, let's say, on the bed, and basically do squats over a man. And if you could picture basically doing the thrusting in a squatting position. It's really powerful. And not everybody's got the knees for it, but I got really good at it. In fact, I could do it in 5-inch heels, which I just figured out actually makes it a little easier because of the angle that you're at. It was part of the way I took back my power. And at the same time that I was experiencing power as an escort and working with the boundaries, I learned how to eroticize a no. And it's something that I teach now in my exquisite partnership formula, which I developed based on what I learned as an escort, so that I could help all the wives and girlfriends that I was coaching who were doing stuff they didn't want to do. I couldn't even fathom that. Like, Why would I do sexual stuff I don't want to do? That sounds non-consensual to me. And what's in it for me, by the way? Because if I'm not getting paid, I better be getting pleasure or bonding or something. And I wasn't in a mind frame to want to please the man's ego or compete with porn stars. Why would I do that? I had done some porn myself, and I had plenty of friends who were porn stars, and I wasn't competing with anybody. I was just being me and showing up with my sexuality. But I want to be very clear. This came about because I stepped into a totally new paradigm. It is not the one that I had in college. What I had in college was men, well, mostly boys, but I did date a few older men when I was in college, who were selfish and wanted what they wanted when they wanted it, and I was kind of submitting to them and letting them drive, if you will. Like, they'd get to decide what we're going to do, when we're going to do it, how we're going to do it, and I'm just showing up to be cooperative. Now, I'm not actually talking about the non-consensual sex that I had. That happened 3 times in my life that I've been raped. I'm talking about consensual sexual encounters before I became a sex worker, where I was just under the idea that the guy was supposed to be more experienced and he was supposed to be kind of in charge of the sex. And he probably knew more than I did. Obviously, that dynamic completely disappears when I became a sexually educated and experienced sex worker. No, I'm the expert now, and I know what we're going to do. But I want to also just highlight what the power dynamic was for me as a sex worker. And I'm not trying to suggest this is the case for all sex workers. Again, please keep in mind, I was married, I had a college degree, and 7 years in corporate America before I ever got into sex work. And I was clean and I was sober. No drugs, no alcohol, in therapy. So it was a very volitional choice to get into this career. And one of the things that was so different that I started seeing a pattern with my male clients, which was that they wanted complete power over their wives and girlfriends. They wanted to be the boss. They wanted to be in charge. And obviously these are kind of wealthy, high-powered, successful men. So I know there's men out there that don't feel that way, but these guys were, they were movers and shakers. So they wanted to dominate the women in their lives, but they didn't want that with me. And I think one of the reasons they were wanting that was because they did control the purse strings. They had the money, and their wives and or girlfriends were kind of disingenuous at times in telling them what they wanted to hear, and maybe walking on eggshells because they had a bad temper or something. I don't know, because I didn't get deeply involved in their marital dynamics usually. Sometimes I did. But for the most part, it just seemed like they wanted to see themselves as captains of business and captains of their home. And then when they found a provider that they trusted and wanted to have a long-term relationship with, and most of them, by the way, did want long-term connections with their providers. So I saw clients for 12 years, which is almost as long as I was in the business. I was in the business for about 14 years. So the reason that they could turn control over to me is because I didn't follow them home, and I wasn't upsetting the power structure that they had created in their homes with their wives. I was instead the person who came with a very strong opinion, who was outspoken, who was actively on television and writing articles from a feminist perspective. I was rebellious in a lot of ways. Got me into a lot of arguments on TV with a lot of people on the talk shows that I went on and the talking heads on Fox and CNN. I did all of that. And that was actually what pulled in my clients. And I think the reason for that is because a woman who has her own sexual sovereignty and her own financial sovereignty, and a woman who is large and in charge, is an incredibly sexually attractive creature. And it is what fires up our libidos. We don't want to be with somebody who just does everything that we tell them to and has no opinion. And it's really a horrible thing that happens in most monogamous heterosexual relationships where there is a power dynamic that's unacknowledged. It's not talked about. It's not, you might think from the outside, these are two very progressive, liberal, enlightened people, and they would never have a power structure. Everything's egalitarian. And then when it comes to the sex, I found over and over again, no, not so much. Not so much. So let's go a little deeper into that. What's one of the things that I also was able to erase from my mental framework that I was handed as somebody who was born into a religious cult? The irony of being born into a family that had pedophiles on both sides, my mother's side, my dad's side. Both my parents were incest survivors, but they were all very deeply religious people, and they preached abstinence, and they were against sex education, and they were against homosexuality, and they were against polyamory or open marriages, or quite frankly, my parents thought that oral sex was a sin. So isn't that amazing that they're so virulently opposed to adult consensual sexual behavior, and yet what's going on behind the scenes is daddy is touching his daughters. And I've seen far too much of that. It's a hypocrisy that's nauseating. But what about the shame that's communicated? Not only was it about my body, and that somehow or another I should be ashamed to have a female body. I mean, the whole idea, cover it up, don't tempt men, our periods are dirty or disgusting in some way. That was all transmitted to me. And I keep waiting for this cultural moment where that's no longer the truth. And I keep thinking, oh yeah, we're getting there. And so many women are talking out, and they're loud and they're proud, and they're celebrating their bodies. And then I get a young couple in their 20s or 30s, and she's still doing sex that hurts, that's uncomfortable, that's unpleasant, and that she doesn't enjoy. And what I often say is that is traumatizing your tissues, not to mention your heart and your soul and your emotions, but it's traumatizing your tissues so that you are teaching them to dissociate and shut down. So yeah, sex sucks. Now we fast forward to a marriage that's been in existence for 10 or 20 years, and they're trying to spice it up. And there's a lot of reasons that happens, a lot of reasons. Sometimes it's because of diet, lifestyle, health, hormones, antidepressants, too much alcohol. And other times, and I think also along with, almost always the case, there's a lot of women that have just endured a lot of unpleasant sex with the men that they love, and they get to a certain point where they're just glad they don't, quote unquote, have to do it anymore. I certainly have talked to plenty of women that feel that way. What could be underneath that, though? If you take this 1 in 4 statistic about having been sexually abused, and then you add to that the women who have been raped, and then you add to that the women who have had Me Too moments, I feel like one of the things that sex educators and sexologists and relationship experts never talk about is the sexual trauma that a lot of women have suffered, and how when they get to a certain point where they've just kind of had it and don't want to have sex anymore, it might not be boredom, and it might not be a lagging libido. It could be the relationship power dynamics, and it could also be a lifetime of sex being associated with some very unpleasant moments, and the body gradually shutting down and becoming less and less available to sexual arousal. The number one thing that I did, the number one thing is to have boundaries and say no. To only do sex that I wanted to do, and only with people that I wanted to do it with. The number two thing that I did, to take back my sexual power and realize that if I was going to say no to things, what did I want to say yes to? I wanted to say yes to my own desire. What were my desires? Wow, that's an exciting thing to get to know. If you're not in a position where somebody's pressuring you and talking you into doing things you don't want to do. The number three thing, learning something about the history of women that predates monotheism. Why monotheism? Because with the advent of monotheism, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, we have this introduction of the idea of the woman's body as sin, of sex as sin, but particularly the woman's body. And I mean, I've read the Bible from cover to cover, lots of references to harlots and whores, and this shaming of female sexuality, and the fact that it needs to be owned and possessed by men, which is patriarchy too. So to say, no, I reject that premise. My organs, my sexual organs are not a vessel that can be used up or stretched out of shape or made tired or exhausted, or it's a muscle, damn it. What do you think births babies? If you have a vagina, I just want to encourage you to pay attention to what a fabulous, powerful, flexible, amazing muscle that is. And that is, in a lot of ways, a seat of my personal power. Every morning I go to my yoga mat and I do a Kundalini practice where I am raising Kundalini energy up from my lower chakras, which are my sexual chakras, and I am raising them up through here, and then I circulate them. I'm not trying to get out of my body. I'm trying to invigorate and enliven my body. And I also do a lot of pubococcygeal muscle exercises. That's PC exercises. I'm going to leave things in below here so that you'll have links to all this stuff. I know it's a muscle, and it is the seat of my sexual power. I have lots of other powers. That's not the only power I have. The other thing that I did to heal myself was decide that I had more worth than whether or not men find me attractive. I like being attractive to myself, to other people of any gender. I love clothes. I love makeup. I love hair. And yay, for me, I want to enjoy that stuff. But that's not what makes me a valuable human being. And I could care less if some people don't like the way I look. If some men are not attracted to me, great. That means I don't have to worry about them intruding on my space. Yeah, wish that had been the case with Daddy. So it's about, I own this. I own this body. I own its sexuality. I own its pleasure. I reclaimed all that. It's mine. And that was really important. Because my dad tried to take that away from me. He tried to take away my no, tried to take away my ability to own this space and to decide when it was going to be touched and how it was going to be touched and by whom. That's what he tried to take away. That's what the 3 rapists tried to take away too. And reclaiming that for me is an act of defiance and of rebirth. So if I'm not ashamed of my body, and I'm not ashamed of my sexual desires, and I'm not ashamed of my sexual function, which, by the way, anecdote here, I went on Bill Maher's Politically Incorrect in 1998 or something like that. And there was an actor on that show who was trying to humiliate me His name is John Schneider. He used to be a star on the Dukes of Hazzard back in, well, when I was 15. When I was 15, he was a star. And I had a crush on him, and all of a sudden I'm doing a TV show with him. And he's trying so hard to humiliate me. And so he's standing up and pantomiming all the positions that one with a female body might assume in order to have sexual intercourse. And he was doing this to try to undermine the fact that I said I had a college degree. He said, "Oh, I have a PhD." And then he stood up and he put his ass in the camera. And then he got in his chair and he spread his legs. And literally, my husband was in the green room having a conversation with his wife. And a green room, it always pipes in the TV show as it's being filmed live. And I thought, hey, guy, I don't know if you get this, but your wife is watching. And those are the very same positions she does with you. So what's your message to her about her dignity? Ah, man. It's just like in the culture, isn't it? It's just in the culture. So, yeah, you kind of have to be counterculture in some ways. And there's another thing that I did to heal. I worked my way completely from front to back through Stacey Haynes' Survivor's Guide to Sex. It is a fabulous workbook. It has got exercises in the end of every chapter, and I worked every single one of them. And most of them have to do with boundaries, consent, and reclaiming. What I loved about her work is that it wasn't like so many of the books at the time for survivors were all about just the boundary, but no invitation for pleasure. Like, wait a second, I want to understand, how do I get my body fired up? Keep in mind, when I left my dad's home, I was anorgasmic. I had a lot of sex in college, never felt a thing, except desperate to be held afterwards and wanted to feel loved. Because that was part of the wounding, right? I'm having sex in order to feel loved. And I love sex in the context of love. I really do. It's my preference. I'm kind of demisexual that way. And plus, I've also done all the other types of sex, so I found them boring. Demisexual is my path. But at the time, that wasn't what I was doing. I wasn't trying to bond. I was trying to feel important and that somebody liked me. And so I was offering sex in exchange for feeling important and loved. Really terrible prescription. That meant that I basically always looked forward to when the sex ended and we would be laying in bed, hopefully cuddling and having some pillow talk. And I'm sure many of you have found out how disheartening it can be sometimes to not have the cuddling and the pillow talk afterwards, especially in college. That didn't happen a lot, but I kept wanting it to happen. Yeah, I'm pausing for a minute just to let my nervous system catch up with the sadness of having been chasing male approval with my sex. Really, really very sad. And that probably is going to create a little cognitive dissonance for you, because I don't have any sadness about having been a prostitute. I don't. I was coming from a place of power. And, more as a healer in a lot of ways. I was helping a lot of men to get back into their bodies and breathe their stress outside of their bodies, and giving them peak sexual experiences, which really required a lot of heart connection. So I have held so many men while they cried after having a really transformative orgasm. And that's, what did you learn about men? People ask me, what did you learn about men? I go, they're women. We're all the same. If you take away the power dynamics that are inherent in most heterosexual relationships, there is a nakedness to male psychology that is also apparent in women. I was shocked because I didn't expect that reversal. There was something about the dynamic with a sex worker and her client, again, in my line of business, which was more verging on courtesan and also a really high-end pro-dom. I did that towards the end, yeah. Domination. I was so surprised how many men wanted to give up their power after having spent so much time trying to accrue power and so vigilantly defending their power at home. And then they would come to my quote-unquote office to surrender their power. The irony. I also did sexual meditations when I was just by myself. And this was another really important thing. I wish every young girl got, for her, I don't know, 16th birthday, a vibrator. Because, I was really, really horny when I was 16. I think a lot of girls are. And wouldn't it be wonderful if they didn't feel like they had to fulfill that need with a person who might harm them or give them a sexually transmitted disease or make them pregnant, just to have more choices, to have more options. I remember one time that Oprah Winfrey was suggesting that all young girls should be given vibrators, and I couldn't agree more. I wish people were talking about that more nowadays, but it's weird. It's like we're headed backwards or something. And some of the progress that we made feels lost. So I'm trying to keep that conversation going. Yeah. Okay, just to recap. Finding my no, having a positive no. If I don't have a firm no, my yes is absolutely meaningless. So boundaries, 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 boundaries. And that is an art in itself, to learn how to assert boundaries. Then learning how to assert boundaries in a way that creates sexual connection. So fine, you can tell some guy you don't care about what your boundaries are, but can you do it in a relationship where you're in love? And that becomes the next test. Can you communicate your boundaries in the throes of passion? Can you say no when you're right there and, everybody's feeling vulnerable and literally naked? And that's something that I learned as an escort, and is something that I teach the couples that I work with, primarily women. I don't find that a lot of men are asking me to help them have sexual boundaries. Some do, just to be clear, but not a lot. Working through Stacey Haynes' book, Survivor's Guide to Sex, really, really crucial to my healing journey. Learning things about Tantra so that sex is not just about the genitals. It starts to become about energy. And that really raises one's intuition and your little spidey sense, so you can become better at figuring out who's friend or foe, particularly if you happen to be dating. But even in a long-term relationship, it's really important to understand when your partner is perhaps going into places where they are being abusive. It happens in the best of relationships where couples say and do things that harm each other. And that's really important to know. This is a good place for me to have a boundary and say no. Yeah. I am looking forward to your questions and your input. This is a conversation. I'm hoping that what I've shared about my own personal journey will evoke something from your personal journey, maybe help you in it, maybe remind you of some things that you want to share. And I'm always here for any questions that come up too. Not that I'm the final word on any of this, but I do have a lot of years of experience. Please don't forget to like and subscribe and share. I appreciate it.